everybody's life is as individual as possible, but our stories are really about what I call primary colors of emotion, that our stories are about fear or love or anger or failure or success or joy. Like that's what the stories are really about, never about the thing that happened. The shorthand I always use is, the story is not about the time your house caught on fire. The story is about what did you grab first?
Welcome to Design Of. I'm your host, Justin Ahrens. And today's guest is a master of one of the oldest and most powerful forms of human connection, storytelling. Peter Aguero is a GrandSLAM champion and longtime host and instructor with the Moth, the legendary nonprofit that's turned live, unscripted storytelling into a global phenomenon. He's known for his fearless honesty, dark humor, and deeply human performances. In this episode, we talk about quitting football, bombing on stage, recording stories in South Jersey, what Conan O'Brien taught him, and how a single moment can spark an entire creative life. We also explore the power of telling the truth, especially the parts you're afraid to say out loud. This one's raw, hilarious, and full of heart. Let's get into it. So you're world-renowned, or at least very well known as a master storyteller. We would absolutely talk about so many things. Your time at the Moth. I have a very curiosity around the lead singer of BTK band, New York's hardest drinking improvised storytelling rock band. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
And I really appreciate that you love your mom. I mean, that's a highlight.
Yeah.
So
that's been part of my bio since college. I think with the very first play I did in college, we were very limited in what we could fit in the Xerox program. And one of my 3 sentences was, Peter loves his mom. And, because I thought she would get a kick out of it. And she has. Yeah. And she has for many years. And I think I might have taken that out of my official bio in some form or another, because she doesn't see them all anymore. It was really just from her.
Yeah. Well, the internet still claims that as part of your bio, just so you know.
Sure.
And I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, let's start here. So how did storytelling, performing, how did that show up early in your life? Like, how did you realize that you had this gift, or at least this desire to perform or be creative?
Well, I had to say it was really after, 10 or almost 15 years of just kind of searching around and doing different things. All of it goes back to one day when I was 16 years old and in high school, and I was the starting offensive tackle on my football team in high school. And then one day during 2-a-day practices before my junior year, I just quit. I didn't want to do it anymore. And that decision, started another branch that led me toward, performance art and other kinds of art in my life. And so when I got to college, I ended up doing like a musical in high school, and it felt amazing. It had everything I was looking for. So when I got to the college, I did some plays and sketch comedy shows with this on-campus theater group. That's where I met my wife. That's where I met many of my friends that I still have to this day. But it's also where I realized that I could get on stage and it would satisfy a lot of things that were missing in my life and give me an outlet for this energy that had always been there. And so I did, in the early 2000s, I like everybody in New York, like most of everybody, I did a lot of improv, and I had a lot of classes, did a lot of open mics. I was in the touring company of a group called Chicago City Limits. It was a short form improv company that had been around for a long time. I learned a lot doing that gig. I got to travel all over the country, and I got to also learn how to be a professional. And it was, it's one, it's one thing to I don't know, like do one big one-off show. It's another thing to travel to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and like, like you give the people the same show on Friday night that you also give to the 14 people that are there for the Sunday matinee. They get the same show, and you learn how to do that. You learn how to access that, and I learned a lot. I learned so much. And so during that time, that was based in New York City. I was still living in Jersey. One of the things that was happening in New York in 1997, there was this organization called the Moth that was founded.
Founded in 1997, the Moth has grown from a porch in Georgia to a global stage where everyone from Malcolm Gladwell to Ethan Hawke has told stories live and without notes. But no one brings quite the same presence to the mic as Peter Aguero.
I started hearing about it probably 2003, 2006, somewhere around there. And that's when some of the guys I knew in the improv company, this guy Brian Finkelstein and some other folks, had been doing it and had suggested that it would be a good idea for me to search it out. And I didn't know what it was or anything. We would do it was a short form improv company, Chicago City Limits. So that was like shorter games, not longer stuff. It was really good for audiences. In between, we would take turns hosting, and you would talk to the audience, and through that we would get the suggestion. So I loved that part. Turns out, like, more than doing the improv. I really liked interacting with people. I liked kind of bouncing the energy around. It was really fun. That was the most fun to me. And so the folks in the improv, Brian and some other folks, be like, you should check out this thing called the Moth. So I guess it had to have been after I moved to New York City. So 2007, I was going to see a buddy's band at the bitter end on Bleecker Street, and I was late. And as I was waiting for him to, like, I was so late I missed his band, and I was waiting for him to.
So very late.
About as late as you could get.
Yeah.
And so, and he wasn't mad because that's what happens. And so I was looking at the calendar outside the bitter end, and I saw, like, 3 days later, or like the next week, I guess it was the next week, it said the Moth Story Slam. And I was like, oh, there's that thing. Here's where it is. I put two and two together. So I went home and looked at their rudimentary website at the time, and there were a couple stories on there. It was still, like, that was 10 years into their existence. And I was like, I could do this. So I went back, and there's these Story Slam competitions. So one of the parts of the Moth is that where there's a theme, people buy tickets, you show up. If you want to tell a story, you put your name in a hat. They select 10 names at random throughout the night. There's 10 people tell a 5-minute story on the theme. And then at the end, somebody wins. There's judges.
So you could be there hoping to present and not get your name pulled?
Yeah. Okay. That's part of it. It's like a lottery open mic, which happen all over the place in the city. There's open mics everywhere in the city. There's some that you sign up for a slot. There's some that are lotteries. There's some where there's people that are booked. It's the kind of like understructure of the New York City art community is these open mics, and slams are a part of that. And there's poetry slams, and so these are story slams. So I went back the next week, and the theme was right. And I stood in line. At the time, you couldn't buy tickets ahead of time. So you had to go, if it was doors at 6:30, show at 7, you had to get there at, 5:30 or 5 o'clock. Then you'd be waiting in line, and like the line would go around the corner. And you would meet people. I met this guy named Tom Ziegler, who was in front of me. And then when we got in, he got selected first, and he told this story. He was a fireman. He told a story about saving someone's life on the highway, was it? It was over on the east side of Manhattan. And so there was a car accident. He saved somebody. He was off duty to save somebody's life. And up by the Harlem River Drive. So it was great. And then I got picked second, and I went up and told a story, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had
Well, do you remember what the theme was for the day?
Yeah, it was Fright was the
Fright.
theme.
Yeah, you just said that.
And I had before that, believe it or not, it was right before I moved to New York City. I had gotten a bunch of money together and went to not a bunch of money, I got enough money together. It was literally like 20s in a wine bottle that I would save. And then when it was time to spend it, I smashed it. I didn't want to be able to steal the money from myself. And I went to a recording studio in South Jersey and I recorded some stories. And I had never, this was before I still at this point didn't even know what the Moth was. I'd never been there. I didn't know what the outlet would be for this kind of thing. I invited some friends, went to this recording studio in Collingswood, New Jersey, a place called the Gradwell House, and I recorded like an album, essentially. Really rudimentary, kind of sloppy, bizarre stuff. And it was really interesting. I don't know why I did it. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. And then when I started going to the Moth, man, after I told that story, I didn't win. The producer is a woman named Jennifer Hickson, who is, legendary. She's a legendary producer, director, and person. One of the most powerful people I've ever met. Just amazing, kind, smart, amazing person. She came up to me after the show. She said, "That was terrible, but you should come back. I want you to come back." She said something about how she liked my voice. So that's the thing about New York is that, you have a lot of times, it's very hoity-toity in New York. You have New Yorkers everywhere. And I've been living here almost long enough to call myself a New Yorker. I guess I qualify as that now. But at the time, I still hadn't shed much of my South Jersey accent, and my blue-collar, no-collar upbringing was very, very apparent in the stories I would tell. I was at that time unaffected by, the jaded nature of living in the city. So I started going to every show. They had shows twice a month at the time in New York, one at the Bitter End and one at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe in the East Village. And these are two legendary venues in New York City. It was just it felt so cool. I had done shows all over the country. I've been traveling and doing all this stuff, but in New York City, it's very hard to do a show for more than a dozen people. It's just it's hard to, there's 9 million people that live here. It's hard to get 50 of them to come to anything. So to be able to get on stage in front of 200, 250 people, whatever, 50 more than the fire code was in these venues, that's how much they put in there. And to be in a New York crowd, all they wanted to do was listen to you do a good job. There's nothing better. And I fell in love with it. And I went for a year and a half. I went to every show. I went to every single show. And there was to your point, there was a stretch there in the middle where I believe it was 8 months I didn't get picked. But that meant that twice a month I would go and listen to 10 stories. And when I would listen to those 10 stories, I would hear about what worked structure-wise, how to be clear, how to be concise, how to be tight, how to edit, how to begin, how to end. I learned a lot about story structure just by listening to good ones and bad ones. And I didn't try to ape anybody else's style. I met a lot of people. And what the coolest thing was at the time is we would do these shows and then we would meet each other standing in line. And then after the show, if you got picked or you didn't, you'd go to the bar next door down the street and you'd talk about what happened. It was like Monday morning quarterbacking about that thing. It was like Eddie Gavigan and Adam Wade and Ophir Eisenberg, these amazing people I got to be friends with. And we all just kind of came up together at the time. And they had been there before me. And then we all just got to be friends. And it was just an amazing, really fruitful time. And I fell in love with it. And I learned a lot. It was great. And then maybe about it could have been by the time I started winning. Once I started winning these slams, I just kept winning. And then eventually the Moth asked me, I started volunteering to teach for the community program. a really good program, going to underserved communities in New York City and teaching people how to tell stories. And there was really not a lot at the time. There wasn't a lot of training to do it. You just kind of like jumped in and did it. And that was just take something instinctual that you do and teach people how to do it.
Right.
Helps you learn how to do it. So that was great. And then eventually they asked me to host shows, which is my greatest joy. It's some of the best work I get to do. And then there's this whole community in New York City in the late 2000s, early 2010s. It was like this really fertile ground for this, the oldest art form in the world. And every once in a while there would be some article in the New Yorker, in the New York Times or something, and you'd get inundated with people searching for something, and that hype would go down. It was like cyclical, you know? And it felt like people were talking about it like it's not really even hyperbolizing. People were talking about it like, you know, folk music in the 60s and you know, like punk in the late 70s in New York. It was like this weird kind of literary thing where you'd show up, there'd be hundreds of people in line. You would get inside and there'd be like 300 people in the venue and 20 of them were volunteering to try to tell a story. And the rest were there just to listen. Wild, just wild. And it was just really, really amazing. And then we all started producing our own shows and trying to come up.
Let me just jump in here really quick.
Yeah, please.
Just for those who have not experienced it. So when you say you were winning, was it you won because the crowd voted for you that night? Or
there were judges. The way the Moth does it, there's 3 teams of judges and they score you like Olympic style afterward. Okay. And they're like, it's not perfect. It's like a whole broken system. You know what I mean? But like purposefully sloppy and broken. So like you'd win a slam, and then they get 10 winners and you would do something called a GrandSLAM, which is a bigger show at a bigger venue. And it was like 10 winners. It was like the Justice League fighting each other. And like you would do that at the time it was Comics was a big venue on 14th Street or the Highline Ballroom. Now they do them at the Music Hall of Williamsburg. So that's like a 600 person venue. It's like bigger, and it's so cool. It's just,
but
you
to
feel
be clear, you have been a GrandSLAM champion.
Yeah. I won once, and then I did a couple other ones. But once I won, I stopped kind of chasing after it because I was like, well, let me give some. I don't need to do this, and like, there's more. Let me have more slots for other people. Like I started winning slams. I won a bunch of slams in a row. I think I won. There was a period where I won, I think, 4 out of 6 slams or like 5 out of 7 slams I did in a row. I was like, that's good enough. And then by that time I was teaching and hosting. So like that felt like the next step anyway. And then producing my own stuff. So.
Well, my question for you is, you know, your storytelling often includes just very personal stories. And how do you handle the vulnerability that comes with this so it feels authentic and not scripted?
Well, I always kind of thought of it as like cutting yourself open and letting people look inside. So like the vulnerability is, I never had a problem with that. I'm at the time in my life, it made sense to me to kind of like, you know, really just show all the cracks that way. I'm a little more careful these days, but at the time it was, how do you do it? There's really nothing to it. It's just you start at the beginning and you tell the truth. So like, it's warts and all, you know, you just talk about when you made mistakes and you failed. It's really being okay with acknowledging your failure, looking at reality. And one of the things I learned right off the bat was it was more interesting for me if I was able to acknowledge as best I could the truth of a situation. Meaning, you know, we have these ideas in our head of what happened to us and around us in our lives. And you go through these situations and because you need to survive these difficult times, you tell yourself a version of the truth to get through it. And then later on, when you recount it, sometimes you still continue to tell that semi-falsified version of things. But I found that like if I could work on a thing, let my subconscious mind work on a memory, I could get closer to the truth of what happened. And that was much more satisfying to me. There's nothing about it that's embarrassing. It's not, like I did this idea of like, I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. So like, there's nothing to be ashamed of with your mistakes, because you are the sum of all of your experiences. So like all of those kind of cliched things add up to the point of like, well, let me do this the best I can. And the best I knew how to do it was to try to be as transparent as possible. But like, how do you make it unscripted? That honestly, I never wrote my stories down. So they weren't scripted. There'd be turns of phrase that I would hit. I would maybe write an outline, like a bullet point outline, and that would give me guideposts, but I never wrote in between those guideposts. I would let myself get from one to the next, and always believe that when I would tell a story, there was never one definitive version of it. There was just the version of that day. So that let me be open to experiment and discover things. And each time I would tell a story, I'd learn something new about that experience.
And well, that's fascinating, because not at all in the universe that you are, but I love to present, right? In
Sure.
conferences and business settings, that sort of thing. And so I create a visual outline and I practice it. I'm assuming you at least run through it, or do you not? Do you just write an outline and just kind of experience it when you're up there?
Yes. Yeah. More like that. I mean, there were like, if I would do a GrandSLAM show, I would probably, because you have to be tight on time. So I would get my phone timer and I would just like tell the story just to see where I was timing wise. Rehearsal was maybe going to an open mic and then doing it there, So the first time I remember when I would do like a Moth main stage, which was like a bigger show with like 5 storytellers each telling like 10 to 12 curated and directed stories. I work on one of those stories with a director at the Moth, and then we would have rehearsal. So there'd be rehearsal like a day before or 2 days before the show. And so you would do that. And like, that was, so there would be a rehearsal then. But once you get on stage, man, the rehearsal doesn't matter. Like the usefulness of a rehearsal is, to me, that you're not saying those words for the first time at the event. You're just, the first time was somewhere else.
Right. There might be some first time things that you say, but the structure overall is you kind of can see it in your brain or feel more comfortable with it. How does the audience impact you when you are telling a story?
Well, they're there. You can talk, anybody who works in the arts will have a different answer to this. And I will have a different answer to this depending on the day. I mean, the audience is necessary, because if you're not telling something to an audience, who are you telling it to? But the audience could also be a microphone, right? So it's, you know what I mean? But the story doesn't change because the story happened. So even the presentation doesn't change, because the presentation, whatever that means, is me, is as authentic to myself as I can be, because that's satisfying. I guess the way the audience changes, the way the story goes in the moment, could be if I go on like a discursive tangent, or there might be something they laughed at in the beginning that I can bring back later, and that's satisfying as a callback. But like, I appreciate the audience. I'm thankful for the audience because they paid money and paid their time to be there. But I've really tried never to let the audience ever affect what it was I'm saying. Because then I'm doing them a disservice if I'm trying to give them what they want, because I don't know what they want. I can only do what teaches me something. And if they take something from it, that's great. That's a struggle. Any artist, I believe, has that struggle the whole time. If an audience is quieter, then there's a different energy. If the audience is more raucous, there's a different energy. There's a story I told. The very first Moth main stage I did was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the auditorium there. It was a Christmas story that I told about my mother and I not having money when she was freshly divorced, and we gave each other pictures of things for Christmas instead of gifts because we didn't have the money. And like that was about as New York Christmas time in the Met, like it's about as what a just an amazing opportunity. I ran through that story 2 days before a show called Original Sin Burlesque at a place called Lucky 13 Saloon in Brooklyn. I was wearing a velour tracksuit and sunglasses in between, like burlesque performance art in a heavy metal dive bar at, staying out till 4 a.m. I told the same story there to like run it through. And I was wearing sunglasses and my voice was more like that, but it was the same story. So it, like the story stayed the same, but it was just like the environment would like kind of maybe change the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what that answers. I mean, I've been where the room is really quiet and I might be smaller to try to amp the energy up. Does this happen to you? Because there's something interesting about when you're sharing a story or doing a presentation, you can actually say words out of your mouth and have a whole other conversation going on in your brain.
Oh yeah. You multitask. Yeah.
I know some people don't get that, but I'll even be thinking, you said something interesting earlier. Like if I say something to talk and someone laughs at it or whatever else, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think they were gonna laugh at it. And I'll check it, right? And I'll bring it back later.
Yeah. No, I believe it's multitasking. It's like opening up a perception. And it's interesting during 2020 when all the work dried up, there was no work anywhere. At the time I bought a bicycle and I started riding around the city because I had terrible arthritis in my knees, my gym closed. So in the depths of the pandemic, I taught myself I'd ridden a bicycle in 20 years. I started riding a bike, and riding in the city is so dangerous.
Yeah.
I had to open up my perception in the way I did when I would host the show, because I had to look at everything all at once, or I'd get hit by a truck. So like that was, like the stakes were a little different, but yeah, it was very close.
One of my first stories, I actually had listened to a version of, I think, You and Your Mama versus Christmas.
Yeah.
The story. One of the stories that I listened to, Peter, that I really related to was, I don't know if you remember, Way Down in the Hole, you were talking about, that felt like it was, you're angry and you were, kind of processing through an anger of an incident.
That guy at the Renaissance Fair? Is that what
Yeah. And so when you're thinking about that, like that actually happened, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And your structure, what I love about it is that you were bringing us along and noticing the sort of the absurdities and also what makes Renaissance fairs hilarious and fun and great to be a part of. But then you have this really like beautiful way to intimately bring us into the fact of just the anger and pain that you felt kind of trying to deal with that situation. So when you're thinking about stories, are the ones that elicit the biggest emotion, whatever that emotion is, are those the ones that are most attractive to you? Or I'm not going to say the easiest to tell, but are the ones that you feel that you can frame an experience through?
Well, I guess so. What I'll say is the thing I'm most interested in is because the emotion varies depending on any time you tell a story, right? It's what do you connect with on that day, in that moment. At least that's how it works for me. So I guess the stories I'm most attracted to are the ones that I think I'll have fun telling that day, the ones that will be enjoyable, even if they're difficult. Emotion-wise, I feel like I'm doing my job best if I can't discern whether or not the story is a happy story or a sad story, because it should be all of it, because that's what life is. Like life is all of that. So it's not just one thing. I think for me, the best stories have all of that in it. Or you can, one day you tell the story and it's funny, the next day you tell the story, it's sad. To me, that's interesting. Depending on the moment, depending on the mood, depending on the situation, set and setting. It depends on that. But what's most interesting, when I would be putting a story together for the first time in my head to structure it, it was, what was the change? Like, what was the thing I learned? What was the thing that I stopped doing or the thing I started doing? Like the story takes place on the day something changes. It was that when I would do improv, that's what they would tell us, that the best scenes are they're always about relationships. So like the best scenes are the ones about the day that relationship changes. So like stories are very much the same. It's the same thing. The ones that are most intriguing to me are the ones where like, like it was those days where like a seemingly small decision ended up being a crossroads that led you, years later to something else. Like because I decided to quit playing football when I was 16, then one day I got to do a show at Lincoln Center. You know what I mean? Like, like one leads directly to the other. Yeah. So, just like I couldn't abide by living a life of daily violence. So instead, I guess I transitioned to emotional violence instead. But what's more, that's the more, I don't know, man. I don't think of the emotions as being set in stone. It's more along the lines of like, what's intriguing to me is like, what changed? Like that's pretty interesting. What about the relationship that's interesting? What lesson do I need to relearn for myself that day? What benefit will I get from telling this story? What is there something I've forgotten about? And this will help me to remember. Something like that, I think.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, in the world that I live in mostly day to day is in the world of branding, creative design, business. And one of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you was just story in general. The whole reason I'm doing this podcast is because I wanted to have the opportunity to meet people and hear their story, be influenced by that. Probably very similar to the experience you've had teaching. I'm sure teaching has made you a better storyteller and aware of other things.
100%.
So in branding, their storytelling is often as a buzzword, right? Like it's part of the experience. What do you think needs to be present in a story for a brand or a particular business to connect?
Yeah, I think it's funny. You hear the buzzword of storytelling a lot. And a friend of a friend, I went to go see a show with a friend of a friend, or a group of us together. And he's like, so what do you do? I'm like, one of them, mostly I'm a storyteller. I tell stories. He's like, oh, that's what I say I do. I work for a marketing company. And I'm like, okay, but I get on stage and I tell people stories. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I understand what you're saying. I
love it.
I think it's just the thing that makes storytelling so strong to get people to connect with the story is that it's recognition. It's when the story is as honest as it can be to the situation. You're not trying to coerce anybody and you're not trying to convince anybody. If the story is just presenting, here's this thing that happened and this is why it matters. The way people connect to that is that they begin to remember things that happened to them that were similar. And then they immediately can identify and empathize with the story that they're being told. They can insert themselves in there as a participant rather than someone receiving it. I think that's why storytelling is so powerful. It's the one of the oldest forms of communication, something that we all do intrinsically. I believe that, like, I've been working in like corporate settings for years where I have this theory called applied narrative that if you take narrative structure and apply it to just about any information you want to give, like good, strong narrative structure, it will be something people will be attracted to like Velcro, because we just want to be heard. We want to be understood. We are afraid that we won't be heard or understood. We want people to know that we were here. We want our experiences. We want to know that our experiences matter. Storytelling does all that stuff. So when people are listening to a story, they then reconnect with something within themselves that connects them to that story, to that person. You don't feel so quite as alone. It takes an individual experience and it makes it universal. Because our stories are not about what happened. Everybody's life is as individual as possible, but our stories are really about what I call, it's like primary colors of emotion. That our stories are about fear or love or anger or failure or success or joy. Like that's what the stories are really about. Never about the thing that happened. The story is about, the shorthand I always use is, the story is not about the time your house caught on fire. The story is about what did you grab first? That's what the story is really about. So, you know, it's that which ultimately is the vulnerability, which is, it's probably difficult in marketing and branding terms. Like vulnerability is that's outside of my bailiwick. But I feel like the strongest ones are the ones where we as humans can identify with something that seems familiar and something that brings us back to our own experience. That's why I think that connects so much.
No,
that's my working theory.
No, I'm with you. And I think this word's being overused as of late too, but you referenced it earlier, but it's also that a story that is authentic, meaning it's true and you can relate to it as another human being, is incredibly powerful, but also I think necessary for business or brands who actually want to make a connection. Like don't try to manipulate someone into believing something because they've experienced whatever it is. Just be authentic with that. Meet them, where they're at.
People know when they're being manipulated. People just know. You could see it at a storytelling show when somebody gets up and they're trying to do too many bits or jokes or trying to be liked rather than trying to tell the story. The audience just gets turned off.
Yeah.
I would much rather anytime hear whatever authentic means, real. I would rather hear a real voice tell about something that really happened to them than a slick, skilled voice talk about something that really doesn't matter ultimately. That's what I would always, that's power.
But here's a question that may be a tough one to answer, but do you have a story or a particular experience that you often will go back to, or as one of your favorite ones to tell? I know you've probably told thousands of stories over the years, but are there any experiences of those stories that pop up to the top?
Well, I'd say when I was doing this more regularly, it was a regular hustle, and I was doing at the time. There was, a couple of years ago, my schedule was wild, and I will never do that again because it's diminishing returns. But I would have probably half a dozen to 10 stories that were like in a repertoire and that were like, I could call on any of them on any given day. And they were really just the ones there'd be like 2 or 3 that I was working on. 2 or 3 that were always kind of, easy to tell in any situation. And then 2 or 3 that like, I always like to tell that were difficult and challenging and interesting to me. There was one story, this doesn't really answer your question, I guess, but there was always, or maybe it does, I don't know. There was one story when I was doing a lot of hustling that was really one that I would tell a lot early on, that was just about a job I had in college. I was driving an Italian ice truck. This was in Jersey.
It was the best job I ever had. I drive around at 4 miles an hour. There was no boss in sight, and I was selling happiness to children. It was a great job, except for the last day, and even the last day wasn't so bad, except for the last 20 minutes. The company was called Super Cool Italian Ice, and it was located on the outskirts of New Brunswick, New Jersey, in Industrial Park, behind a sign. It was a building, and it was behind a sign that inexplicably said Jacoby Appliance Parts. Super Cool Italian Ice was run completely by men of Middle Eastern descent, and the boss was a guy named Muhammad, who introduced himself to me as Mark, and it was 1998. So Mark had a truck licensed to sell in each of the surrounding towns, and he gave me Piscataway. Piscataway was a little small blue-collar town, a lot of families, a lot of kids and stuff. It was pretty good. If you've never driven an Italian ice truck or an ice cream truck or whatever, it's all a matter of looking at the map, and it's all math, trying to figure out the way you can hit the most amount of neighborhoods without doing a lot of backtracking. I did that, and I was very successful at it. The first summer, well, you laugh all you want. I was, at that point in my life, anything was a success. So,
and I got into a territorial dispute with a guy, and we ended up having a physical altercation. And he beat me with a hammer, and it got really violent.
Sorry, I'm laughing. It sounds like a terrible.
No, it was a complete nightmare. I was way out of my depth. I was 22 years old, and it was July 4th, 1999. And that was a story where I learned about the thing of, the experience was that was my experience. No one I knew had ever been through something like that before. But the story was really about fear and pride and being lost. I was very lost at the time. So I learned a lot by telling that story over and over. But then one of the things that happened was in New York City, there is a cutthroat ice cream truck business. And every single summer, there's some kind of violence between two rival ice cream trucks. And people would send me the links to these stories every year. So it was well, I guess my experience is not that unique anyway. But that story was one that I learned a lot from, because if it was just about, hey, look at this crazy thing that happened to me, it would have gotten boring for me. So I kept telling that story, and it made me realize what it was really about, which was, again, it was about being afraid and being lost and not feeling much of anything, which goes back to, I've always had struggles with depression and anxiety my whole life. And that's just a constant battle, always will be. And that was a period in which and that was the way I dealt with it. At the time I was young, and I was pretty lonely, and there was violence was a way to deal with things. And it's not the way I would do it anymore. And sometimes that was a good story to tell, because it reminded me of that I don't do it that way. I don't know if that, but at any time there'd be different stories to tell, and I would shift ones in or out of that rotation. And it was really, I was very practiced, and really I was at the top of my game.
Yeah.
And it was good. It was good for a good long while, until, like I said, I've kind of pulled back a bit now, just because I have become very uninterested in talking about myself. So I don't really do that as much anymore. I find it more interesting I like to host shows, because it's helping to facilitate other people to tell their stories, and also to teach for the same reason.
Yeah.
I'm
grateful I got to experience it, because you are an awesome host. You engage everyone.
Thanks, man. I love that work.
You kind of have us ready. It's funny. It's, sometimes this is, and sorry to embarrass you, but this is true. Sometimes when a host comes up, you're like, okay, host, we're ready for the show, but I wanted more of you. So thank you for that.
Hey, you got all I was going to give. That's it.
Well, we're about done here. Thank you again for your time. But did I read somewhere? Did you interact with Conan O'Brien?
Yeah, I did a couple bits on the show. Man, when was that? That had to have been 2008, 9, 10, around there, before he got the Tonight Show.
Was that fun? Was that that?
It was really cool. It was really cool. I think I did the show 4 or 5 times. There's comedy bits in the beginning of the show. There were a couple recurring bits. I was never a recurring character, but whenever the writers needed a big guy for something, there was a period where they would call me in, and it was super cool. It was such a cool experience. And the very first one I did was during the writer's strike. So it had to be 2008 then. And watching Conan O'Brien without writers direct and write the show himself in real time was unreal to be able to watch that. But by the time
your class of
man,
writing,
he very much knew how he would block the cameras. He was sitting at his desk and would just run it, because no one could contribute. It was so he had to do it all. It was unreal. And then it might have been the second to last time I did it. When I was leaving, he was talking, I'll never forget this. He was talking to Brian Posehn, the comic who was on the show that day. And he was talking to him, and he turned, he saw me, and he said, hold on a second. He came down the hallway, and he shook my hand. He was like, great work today. I hope I see you again soon.
In a city that rarely stops to applaud, a few words from Conan O'Brien reminded Peter that encouragement matters, and that one voice can change the story someone tells about themselves.
And I was like, thanks, brother. Appreciate that. Like that was just like, when you're hustling, especially in New York City, you're trying to figure out what you're doing with your life, like to be able to like have somebody that respected and skilled and knows what they're doing to be able to say, hey, I like the work you're doing. I hope I see you do more of it. That also taught me that how important that is to make sure to tell other people. And I always now, whenever I'm hosting a Moth show and somebody comes in, I really love, they have some kind of crackling energy that just feels so cool. I always say to them, please come back and tell more stories. Like, I don't do what Jen Hickson did. I don't tell them that was terrible. Please come back. And I was like, oh, you're great. Please, but like, please come back. And like, because that means a lot just to be able to like help each other all out. This world is hard enough. You might as well help buoy each other up a little bit.
Yeah, man.
That was a great experience. I got to do some that was fun. That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, my last question is, do you have a story either when you're doing sketch comedy or even from the Conan show, or even from the Moth, where either your show went just unbelievable and you've just felt so much great energy from it, or it just absolutely bombed and you're like, what the hell?
Oh, all of it. That's happened. Like, I'll never forget some really good days. I remember the first time I won a Moth Slam. It felt so amazing. And walking, like I walked from Greenwich Village. I still live in Queens. But like I walked from Greenwich Village up to Times Square to take the 7 train home. And like that walk at night in New York with that feeling of victory. I mean, nothing better. It was just one of those, it made me think, I always think of like the ultimate experience, like the end of Rocky 2 when he wins and he says, I want to say to my wife who couldn't be here, yo, Adrian, I did it. Like coming home to tell my wife, hey, I won tonight, like that feeling of I added something to this city, like something I did that is now part of the city. Nothing better than that. But then it's also, man, I have more, the bombing stories and the horrible, there's so many of those. If last week, I have a new show that I'm producing now that's a really fun show that I'm working on with some old friends. We did our December show, and at this place called Under St. Mark's in the East Village. I've been a resident artist there for a long time. This little black box in the village. And the show starts at 7:15. No audience showed up. So we just the three of us just kind of plugged in instruments and played around for 45 minutes and then had a beer and went home. And it was such a drag. But like both of those things, both of those sides of the spectrum are the whole experience. You can't have one without the other. And the great successions, which I've been very blessed to have a bunch of those, wouldn't feel as good without the horrible experiences, which I've been very blessed to have those too, because I fully, absolutely believe in the fact that you don't learn anything from success, you only learn from failure. So I try to welcome the failures as much as I celebrate the successes, like all of that's just as important. Bomb constantly, go screw up, make as many mistakes as you can, like just because that means you're taking chances and doing something. That's been important to me for sure.
I love it. Peter, thanks so much for being on the show.
My pleasure, Justin.
Man, it's great.
Just a few days before editing this episode, I had a chance to see Peter live again. And, he doesn't just tell stories. He opens the door to what's real. And I think in a world that often rewards polish over presence, Peter reminds us that the most memorable stories aren't always the smoothest. They're the ones that leave a mark. From sold-out shows at the Met to empty black box theaters, Peter has done what most of us are too scared to try. Show up, speak honestly, and keep going. whether it's teaching others at the Moth or getting hit with a hammer while selling Italian ice in Jersey. His gift isn't just storytelling. It's showing us how to live a more honest, examined life. If this episode moved you, please share it. And if there's a story inside you, please tell it. Someone's waiting to hear it. Before we go, a huge thank you to Sleeping at Last for providing the soundtrack to our show. Ryan's music has been a constant source of inspiration, and if you want to hear more, visit sleepingatlast.com or search Sleeping at Last wherever you get your music. And a special shout out to our incredible audio engineer, Steve Wick, who loved this episode so much, it reminded him of his favorite bedtime story.
The tin soldier stood, steadfast, while the flames leapt and danced around him. He felt the great heat, but wasn't sure if it was from the flames or from the love that burnt inside him.
I truly hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it. If you did, please leave us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. Share the show with your friends, post about it on your favorite social platform, and help us keep these stories going. You can follow us on X at Design of Podcast and check out our site, rule29.com, for more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Design Of.